The most important conversation in a company is the one people think nobody important is listening to. Ethan Parker had built one of the fastest-growing logistics companies in America, with distribution centers stretching across multiple states and thousands of employees moving packages every single day. At 39 years old, he was the kind of CEO whose face appeared in business magazines and whose decisions affected entire communities. Yet despite all the reports on his desk, all the performance charts, and all the glowing presentations from upper management, there was one question he could never answer from behind the walls of his executive office. What were people really like when they thought the boss wasn't around? That question was exactly why, on a gray Tuesday morning in late October, Ethan parked an aging white delivery van behind one of his company's busiest regional facilities outside Columbus, Ohio. Instead of his tailored suit, he wore a plain blue delivery uniform. Instead of a luxury watch, he wore a cheap digital one. Even his usually neat hairstyle had been hidden beneath a worn baseball cap. To anyone passing by, he looked like just another contract driver dropping off packages before the start of a busy shift. The cold air carried the smell of rain as employees streamed through the main entrance carrying coffee cups and backpacks. Most of them never gave Ethan a second glance. That was exactly what he wanted. For months, corporate surveys had painted a picture of a workplace filled with teamwork, respect, and strong morale. But anonymous comments buried deep inside internal reports suggested a different story. Complaints about favoritism, rumors of workplace bullying, employees feeling ignored. None of it was enough to trigger alarm bells on its own, yet together they created a pattern Ethan couldn't ignore. So he decided to see the truth for himself. He grabbed a handheld scanner and stepped into the loading area, where dozens of workers were already rushing between stacks of boxes and rolling carts. The warehouse buzzed with movement. Forklifts beeped in the distance. Supervisors shouted schedules over the noise. Everyone seemed focused on hitting targets before the next shipment deadline. A tall employee brushing past him barely acknowledged his presence. Another tossed a clipboard onto a nearby table without even looking at the older worker who had been trying to ask a question. Small moments, easy to miss. Yet Ethan noticed every one of them. He had learned long ago that culture revealed itself in tiny interactions long before major problems appeared. As he moved deeper into the facility, he overheard conversations that sounded less professional than the reports he'd read. Complaints about coworkers, sarcastic remarks about management, dismissive comments aimed at people lower on the ladder. Nothing dramatic. Not yet. But enough to make him wonder how much was happening beneath the surface. Then something unexpected caught his attention. Near the employee entrance, a woman hurried inside carrying a lunch bag and a worn backpack. She looked exhausted, as if she'd already lived a full day before arriving for work. Yet despite being clearly rushed, she stopped to hold the door open for an older janitor pushing a supply cart. The man smiled gratefully. She smiled back and continued on her way. Ethan only saw the exchange for a few seconds, but something about it stood out. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. He didn't know that before this week was over, that single moment of kindness would change everything he thought he knew about his company. By mid-morning, Ethan had managed to blend into the background so completely that most employees treated him as if he were invisible. For a man accustomed to boardrooms and executive meetings, the experience was eye-opening. People revealed far more about themselves when they believed nobody important was paying attention. As he moved between loading docks and storage aisles, he kept noticing the same woman he had seen earlier near the entrance. She worked quickly, scanning packages, answering questions, and helping coworkers stay on schedule. What surprised him was not how hard she worked. It was how many people seemed willing to take advantage of her willingness to help. Whenever a task needed to be done, someone called for her. Whenever a problem appeared, someone expected her to solve it. Yet very few people thanked her. During a short break, Ethan finally learned her name. Sarah Mitchell. He overheard it when a supervisor asked her to double-check a shipment that another employee had prepared incorrectly. Instead of arguing or pointing fingers, Sarah simply nodded and got to work. Ethan watched as she spent nearly 20 minutes correcting mistakes that were clearly not her responsibility. The supervisor left without a word of appreciation. Sarah returned to her station and continued working as if nothing had happened. The more Ethan observed, the more curious he became. Around noon, employees gathered in the break room for lunch. Ethan sat alone at a small table near the corner, pretending to review delivery paperwork while quietly listening to conversations around him. The atmosphere changed the moment Sarah entered the room. She carried a homemade lunch packed in reusable containers and chose a seat by herself near the window. No one invited her to join them. No one greeted her. It was not open hostility. It was something subtler and, in many ways, more revealing. She was simply ignored. Across the room, a group of employees laughed loudly while discussing weekend plans. Jason Reed sat at the center of the conversation, confident, popular, and clearly comfortable being the loudest voice in the room. He seemed to enjoy having an audience. Beside him sat Olivia Brooks and Mark Turner, who laughed at nearly everything he said. Ethan noticed Jason glance towards Sarah before leaning closer to the group. Their voices dropped slightly, but not enough to prevent nearby people from hearing. Sarah kept eating quietly, focused on her phone for a moment before returning it to her bag. Whatever message she had received seemed important. A small smile crossed her face, the first genuine smile Ethan had seen all day. He wondered if it was from her child. Then the smile disappeared as another supervisor entered the room and immediately handed Sarah additional paperwork to complete before the end of her shift. Once again, she accepted it without complaint. Ethan checked the clock. In only a few hours, he had learned more about this facility than months of management reports had revealed. One employee was carrying far more responsibility than anyone acknowledged. More importantly, there was a growing sense that something beneath the surface was not right. He could not yet explain it, but every instinct he had developed as a business leader told him the real story of this warehouse had not revealed itself yet. The rest of the afternoon seemed ordinary on the surface, but Ethan had learned that the most revealing moments in a workplace often happened when people believed nobody was paying attention. Around 3 o'clock, a shipment delay forced several employees to remain near the loading area while managers worked through scheduling adjustments. Ethan used the opportunity to stay close enough to observe without drawing attention to himself. Sarah was moving between stations, helping wherever she was needed. She answered questions from newer employees, fixed labeling errors, and even helped reorganize a stack of packages that had been sorted incorrectly. Despite doing the work of several people, she remained calm and professional. What Ethan could not understand was why someone so dependable seemed isolated from everyone else. The answer began revealing itself sooner than he expected. As Sarah disappeared into a nearby inventory room, Jason Reed leaned against a pallet and smirked at the group around him. Olivia Brooks and Mark Turner stood nearby, along with 2 other employees. Their conversation started casually enough, but quickly shifted towards Sarah. "There goes the company hero," Jason said with a laugh. Several people chuckled. "You mean the company charity project?" Olivia replied. More laughter followed. Ethan kept his eyes on a clipboard, pretending not to listen. "I do not know how she does it," Mark added. "Every week, there is some new problem. School schedules, childcare, extra shifts. It is always something." Jason shook his head dramatically. Maybe if she spent less time playing the victim and more time planning her life, she would not be in that situation. The group laughed again. Ethan felt his jaw tighten. What surprised him was not the criticism itself. Every workplace had gossip. What disturbed him was the complete lack of empathy. None of these people seemed interested in facts. They had turned Sarah into a caricature, a convenient target for jokes that made them feel superior. Olivia glanced toward the inventory room to make sure Sarah was not returning. "Did you see her car in the parking lot?" she asked. "I think it is older than some of the equipment in this building." More laughter erupted. "Maybe we should start a fundraiser," Jason said sarcastically. "Help save Sarah from another crisis." Even employees who had not contributed to the conversation smiled awkwardly rather than objecting. That was the moment Ethan noticed something important. The problem was bigger than a few rude comments. A culture had formed around them. People were rewarding cruelty with laughter and treating kindness as weakness. A few minutes later, Sarah returned carrying inventory reports. The entire group instantly changed their behavior. Smiles appeared. Voices softened. Jason even thanked her for helping with a shipment issue earlier. Sarah nodded politely and continued working, completely unaware of what had just been said behind her back. Ethan watched the exchange in disbelief. The contrast was so sharp it almost felt rehearsed. As Sarah walked away, he noticed her checking the time on her phone. A text message appeared on the screen, and despite everything, she smiled. Whatever challenges she carried outside these walls, she was still finding reasons to keep going. Ethan looked back at the group, standing nearby. For the first time that day, he realized this situation was far more serious than he had imagined, and he had a feeling the worst was still ahead. The warehouse finally settled into the slower rhythm that came near the end of a long shift. Trucks continued arriving and departing, but the frantic pace of the morning had faded. Ethan remained unnoticed among the workers, and that gave him a front-row seat to something he never expected to witness. As employees prepared for the final hours of the day, Sarah quietly gathered her things and headed toward the employee parking lot during a short break. Curious, Ethan stepped outside a few minutes later. The cool autumn air carried a steady breeze across the rows of parked vehicles. Near the far end of the lot, he spotted Sarah standing beside an aging sedan. The car was clearly well used, but she was not focused on the vehicle. She was smiling at her phone. For the first time all day, she looked completely different. The exhaustion was still there, yet it was softened by warmth and genuine happiness. Ethan could not hear the entire conversation, but he caught fragments as she spoke. She was talking to her son. She asked about homework. She reminded him to finish dinner. She promised she would be home as soon as her shift ended. The affection in her voice was impossible to miss. After a few minutes, the call ended. Sarah took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and headed back inside. Ethan followed at a distance. What happened next stayed with him long after the moment passed. Near one of the side entrances, an older maintenance employee was struggling to move several supply containers onto a cart. Most workers walked past without noticing. Sarah immediately stopped. She set down her own items and spent several minutes helping him organize everything. The man thanked her repeatedly. Sarah simply smiled and told him to have a good evening. There was no audience, no supervisor watching, no reward waiting for her. She did it because she saw someone who needed help. Later that afternoon, Ethan overheard another conversation. Two newer employees were discussing a scheduling issue. One of them mentioned that Sarah had voluntarily traded shifts with a coworker the previous week so that person could attend a family emergency. Neither employee sounded surprised. They spoke as though acts of kindness from Sarah were routine. Yet somehow those same qualities seemed invisible to the people who mocked her. As the shift continued, Ethan noticed another pattern. Whenever a difficult task appeared, supervisors instinctively turned to Sarah. Whenever an employee had a question, they often asked Sarah before approaching management. She had become the unofficial problem solver for the facility. Yet despite carrying so much responsibility, she remained excluded from the social circles that dominated the workplace. Then, just before the end of the day, Ethan witnessed something that raised even more questions. A supervisor reviewed several performance reports and casually mentioned that Sarah's numbers ranked among the highest in the entire facility. The comment lasted only seconds before the conversation moved on. But Jason, standing nearby, did not look pleased. Neither did Olivia or Mark. Their expressions changed immediately. It was subtle, but Ethan noticed. For the first time, he wondered if their treatment of Sarah had less to do with her circumstances and more to do with something else entirely. Something deeper, something personal. And judging by the looks exchanged between them, whatever that reason was, it was about to create much bigger problems. The following morning, Ethan returned before sunrise. The events of the previous day had left him with more questions than answers. What bothered him most was the disconnect between performance and perception. Sarah appeared to be one of the most reliable employees in the facility, yet she was treated like an outsider. Jason and his friends seemed determined to diminish her accomplishments, and Ethan intended to find out why. The warehouse came alive as workers arrived for another busy shift. Ethan resumed his role as an unnoticed delivery driver and spent the first few hours observing. Before long, he noticed something unusual. A high-priority shipment scheduled for a major retail client was experiencing delays. Several package records were missing from the tracking system. Supervisors were already discussing potential penalties if the problem was not resolved quickly. Ethan watched as managers searched for answers. Then he noticed Jason speaking quietly with Olivia and Mark near a row of loading stations. Their conversation ended abruptly whenever anyone approached. It was not enough to prove anything, but it caught Ethan's attention. An hour later, the situation became worse. A supervisor announced that inventory records connected to the delayed shipment had been processed under Sarah's employee credentials. Several workers immediately exchanged glances. Ethan noticed Jason trying to hide a satisfied smile. Sarah looked genuinely confused. She calmly explained that she had not handled that portion of the shipment. The supervisor asked her to review the records anyway. Without arguing, she agreed and began searching through the system. Ethan expected the truth to emerge quickly. Instead, more discrepancies appeared. Missing scans, incorrect timestamps, incomplete documentation. Every new detail seemed to point towards Sarah. Yet the deeper Ethan looked, the less sense it made. Nothing matched the employee he had spent 2 days observing. Sarah was meticulous, organized, careful. These mistakes felt completely out of character. Throughout the afternoon, whispers spread across the warehouse. Some employees avoided eye contact with Sarah. Others openly speculated about disciplinary action. Jason never directly accused her, but he always seemed nearby whenever the rumors gained momentum. It was subtle enough to avoid suspicion, yet obvious enough for Ethan to recognize the pattern. By late afternoon, Sarah finally sat alone at a workstation reviewing hundreds of shipment records. She looked exhausted. Ethan passed by carrying a stack of paperwork and overheard part of a conversation between Sarah and a supervisor. What struck him was not fear or anger. It was disappointment. Sarah seemed less worried about herself than about letting people down. She kept repeating that there had to be an explanation. There had to be something they were missing. As evening approached, Ethan quietly gained access to additional operational reports available to management. What he discovered sent a warning through his mind. Several system entries connected to the shipment had been altered unusually close together. Even more interesting, the changes appeared to originate from multiple employee accounts, less concerned than everyone else. In that moment, Ethan became convinced of one thing. This was no accident. Someone had set a trap. The only question was whether he could uncover the truth before Sarah paid the price for it. By Thursday morning, the atmosphere inside the warehouse had changed completely. What had started as a shipment discrepancy was now being treated as a serious performance issue, and Sarah stood at the center of it. Ethan watched from a distance as supervisors held quiet meetings and reviewed reports. Every conversation seemed to circle back to the same question. How could one of the facility's most trusted employees be connected to so many errors? The answer should have been obvious to anyone paying attention, yet the growing pressure made people eager to accept the simplest explanation. Throughout the day, Sarah continued working while carrying a burden that no one else seemed willing to acknowledge. She answered questions, completed assignments, and stayed professional, but the strain was becoming impossible to hide. Her smile appeared less often. Her shoulders seemed heavier. More than once, Ethan saw coworkers stop talking when she approached. The rumors were spreading faster than the facts. Shortly after lunch, Sarah was called into a meeting with management. The conversation lasted nearly 40 minutes. When she finally emerged, her expression told Ethan everything he needed to know. She was trying to stay composed, but disappointment filled her eyes. One supervisor quietly informed her that corporate compliance would be reviewing the situation. Until the investigation was complete, her future with the company could not be guaranteed. Sarah nodded politely and returned to work. She did not argue. She did not complain. Yet Ethan could see the impact those words had on her. Near the end of the shift, he stepped outside to load several packages into the delivery van. As he crossed the parking lot, he noticed Sarah sitting alone in her car. The engine was off. Rang. It was her son. Ethan was too far away to hear every word, but he caught enough to understand the conversation. The boy sounded excited about a school project. Sarah immediately shifted her attention to him. Her voice became warm and encouraging. She praised his effort and promised to help him finish it that evening. Not once did she mention the problems she was facing. Not once did she allow her worries to affect him. When the call ended, she remained in the car for another minute. Then she wiped her eyes, took a deep breath, and returned to the building. Ethan stood frozen. In all his years as a business leader, he had met executives who handled billion-dollar negotiations with less courage than the woman he had just watched. Meanwhile, inside the warehouse, Jason, Olivia, and Mark appeared unusually relaxed. The investigation that threatened Sarah seemed to concern them very little. That fact alone deepened Ethan's suspicions. Later that evening, after gaining access to additional internal records, he finally discovered something important. A series of system changes connected to the shipment problem had occurred during periods when Sarah was not even logged into the network. Someone had manipulated the records. Someone had carefully created a trail designed to point directly at her. And for the first time since arriving at the facility, Ethan believed he was close to identifying exactly who was responsible. Friday morning began with an unusual announcement. All employees were instructed to attend a mandatory meeting at the end of the day. No explanation was provided. The message spread through the warehouse almost immediately, generating speculation in every department. Reports, workstation activity logs, and internal communications all pointed toward the same conclusion. The shipment issue had not been caused by incompetence. It had been manufactured. More importantly, the people responsible had become careless. They believed nobody was looking closely enough to connect the details. Throughout the day, Ethan noticed growing confidence among Jason, Olivia, and Mark. The three of them spent time together, occasionally glancing towards Sarah with expressions that suggested they already knew how the situation would end. At one point, Jason even joked with another employee about upcoming promotion opportunities. Ethan found the timing interesting. It was almost as if Jason expected a valuable position to become available soon. Meanwhile, Sarah continued doing exactly what she had done every day since Ethan arrived. She helped coworkers, solved problems, covered extra responsibilities. Not once did she attempt to gain sympathy or defend herself through office gossip. Her focus remained on her work, even while uncertainty hung over her future. Shortly after lunch, Ethan uncovered the final detail he needed. Security access records showed that one of the system modifications connected to the shipment discrepancy had occurred while Sarah was helping unload a delivery truck in a completely different area of the facility. Multiple witnesses confirmed her location. The timeline made it impossible for her to have altered the records. Even more revealing, the activity originated from a workstation regularly used by Mark. Additional review connected other suspicious changes to accounts accessed by Jason and Olivia. The picture was now complete. As the workday came to an end, employees began gathering in the main meeting area. Hundreds of chairs filled the space normally used for training sessions and company presentations. Conversations echoed throughout the room. Sarah sat near the back, hoping to remain unnoticed. Jason, Olivia, and Mark sat together near the front. They looked relaxed, confident, certain of the outcome. Then a familiar delivery driver entered the room. Few people paid attention at first. Ethan walked calmly toward the stage positioned at the front of the hall. Several employees exchanged confused looks. A supervisor stepped aside and handed him a microphone. The room gradually fell silent. Sarah looked up, puzzled. Jason frowned. Olivia stopped smiling. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Ethan removed his baseball cap and placed it on the podium. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Then recognition began spreading across the room like a wave. Eyes widened. Whispers erupted. Faces turned pale. The delivery driver they had ignored all week was not a delivery driver at all. And the truth he was about to reveal was going to change everything. The room remained silent as Ethan Parker looked across the crowd. Employees who had barely noticed him all week now stared in disbelief. Some recognized him immediately from company newsletters and annual meetings. Others needed a few extra seconds before the reality finally sank in. The man they had treated as an ordinary delivery driver was the founder and chief executive of the entire company. Ethan allowed the silence to settle before speaking. His voice was calm, measured, and impossible to ignore. He explained that he had spent the week inside the facility because he wanted to understand what life was truly like for employees beyond reports and presentations. He spoke about teamwork, accountability, and respect. Then his tone shifted. He explained that during his visit, he had witnessed behavior that did not reflect the values the company claimed to represent. Uneasy glances spread throughout the audience. Jason's confidence disappeared. Olivia folded her arms tightly. Mark stared at the floor. Ethan continued. He described seeing hardworking employees overlooked. He described hearing conversations filled with disrespect and mockery. He described a workplace culture where some people were rewarded for appearances while others carried burdens without recognition. Then he turned toward a large screen behind him. A series of reports appeared. Timestamp records, system activity logs, security access summaries. The evidence was presented clearly and methodically. Ethan explained how the shipment discrepancy had been investigated. He showed that critical system changes occurred while Sarah was physically working in other locations. He demonstrated that records connected to the errors originated from multiple accounts tied to specific individuals. Murmurs spread through the crowd as employees began realizing where the evidence was leading. Jason shifted in his chair. Olivia avoided eye contact with everyone around her. Mark looked increasingly nervous. Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The facts spoke for themselves. One by one, the assumptions that had damaged Sarah's reputation collapsed. The audience learned that she had not created the shipment problem. She had not falsified records. She had not violated company policy. Instead, she had spent days trying to solve a problem created by others while enduring suspicion and isolation. Ethan then revealed something even more powerful. Throughout the week, he had also reviewed performance metrics, attendance records, peer feedback, and operational results. Sarah consistently ranked among the strongest employees in the facility. She volunteered for difficult assignments, supported coworkers, maintained exceptional performance standards. In every measurable category, she exceeded expectations. The room grew quieter with every word. Finally, Ethan addressed the issue that had disturbed him most. He spoke about respect. He described hearing jokes and comments directed at someone whose only mistake was facing personal challenges while continuing to show up every day and do her job with integrity. He explained that character was revealed not by how people treated executives, but by how they treated those they believed had no power. Then he announced the results of the investigation. Employees directly involved in manipulating records and violating company standards would no longer remain with the organization. Additional disciplinary actions would follow based on corporate review. No shouting followed. No dramatic confrontation was necessary. The truth had already delivered its own consequences. Ethan then looked toward the back of the room where Sarah sat in stunned silence. For the first time all week, every eye in the building turned toward her. But this time, the attention was not based on rumors. It was based on the truth. For several seconds, Sarah remained frozen in her seat. She had spent days preparing herself for the worst, yet nothing could have prepared her for what was happening now. Ethan's words had changed the entire room. The whispers, assumptions, and rumors that had followed her throughout the week suddenly lost their power. For the first time, people were not looking at her as a problem to be solved or a mistake to be blamed. They were seeing the truth. Ethan stepped away from the podium and walked toward the center of the stage. He explained that leadership was not about titles. It was about character. Over the course of the week, he had watched hundreds of interactions inside the facility. Some had disappointed him. Others had reminded him exactly why he started the company in the first place. Then he spoke directly about Sarah. He described the morning she stopped to help the janitor without being asked. He described the extra shifts she covered for coworkers. He described the patience she showed while carrying responsibilities that extended far beyond the workplace. Every example came from something he had personally witnessed. Sarah lowered her eyes, overwhelmed by the attention. She had never expected recognition. She had simply been trying to make it through each day. Ethan then announced that effective immediately, Sarah would be promoted into a newly expanded operations leadership role. The position included increased compensation, additional training opportunities, and a direct pathway into regional management if she chose to pursue it. The room erupted into applause. This time, the applause was genuine. Many employees stood. Others smiled. Some looked embarrassed by how easily they had accepted false assumptions. Sarah covered her mouth in disbelief. Tears filled her eyes, but they were very different from the tears she had fought back in her car the day before. Ethan waited for the applause to settle before making one final announcement. After observing the challenges faced by working parents throughout the company, he was launching a new employee support initiative across all locations. The program would provide expanded scheduling flexibility, emergency family assistance resources, and additional support for single parents balancing work and home responsibilities. The audience responded with another round of applause. What had started as an investigation into one facility was now creating positive change for thousands of employees. Later that evening, as people slowly left the building, Sarah stepped outside into the cool Ohio air. The parking lot looked exactly the same as it had all week, yet everything felt different. Her phone rang. It was her son. This time, when he asked how her day had gone, she laughed through happy tears. She told him she had some good news to share when she got home. Across the parking lot, Ethan watched her leave. He knew the company still had work to do. Culture could not be fixed in a single meeting. Trust had to be earned every day. But he also knew something else. The strongest part of any organization was not its buildings, technology, or profits. It was the people who chose integrity when nobody was watching. And among all the employees he had met that week, Sarah Mitchell had reminded him of that truth better than anyone else.